The Congress and the Senate have voted to force the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files. The legislation now heads to President Trump's desk for his signature. If it is signed into law, the Justice Department would have to release all of the documents. The bill, though, does allow redactions for information identifying victims and any material depicting child sex abuse. But flight logs, personal communications, immunity agreements, and internal memos must be included. NewsNation's Joe Khalil is following all of these developments, is live now on Capitol Hill. All right, Joe, what happens now?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions about what this looks like moving forward, Nicole. I can tell you a lot of that is going to be in the hands directly of the Department of Justice, the Attorney General Pam Bondi, and President Trump as to where this Epstein files bill goes next and whether those files are ultimately released. This morning, the Attorney General did get questions about this at a press conference directly. She was asked 3 separate times whether the department was going to fully release the Epstein files if President Trump signs this bill into law. And this is what she said each time she got the question.
We have released over 33,000 Epstein documents to the Hill, and we'll continue to follow the law and to have maximum transparency. We will continue to follow the law with maximum transparency while protecting victims. We will follow the law. The law passed both chambers last evening. It has not yet been signed, but we will continue to follow the law, again, while protecting victims, but also providing maximum transparency.
So you probably noticed there was never a yes or a no. It was a we will follow the law. Well, here's what the law is going to be. If President Trump signs the bill, it will require within 30 days of the president's signature, the Department of Justice to release all of the Epstein files, and if they do not, then they are technically violating U.S. criminal law. So that is what the law is going to say, but there are still a lot of members of the House, senators, and even the victims and survivors of Jeffrey Epstein themselves that are skeptical that this is going to happen, at least not without some serious pressure from them, potentially some hiccups. There are a couple of different ways that this could go. But take a listen to at least one of, again, the Epstein survivors. We asked her last night whether she has faith the DOJ is going to release all of these files and act in full transparency here. This is what she told us.
My trust in the DOJ is pretty rocky, I think, for very good reason. I'm maintaining that hope because that's what I do. I don't know that I share that sentiment with others. I think a lot of people are adamantly thinking there's no hope and no trust in the DOJ.
Now, there are a couple reasons why lawmakers and frankly, the survivors feel that way, because there were a couple of options here. Number one, the president could have done this already. The president, right now, as I'm talking to you, could call on the Department of Justice to release all of these files. It actually does not take an act of Congress to sort of force his hand that way. And the fact that he has not done that yet is a reason that some are skeptical about the motivations and whether the White House is fully on board with the full release of these files. So there's one reason. The other reason that we've heard some skepticism is that the president has also called on the Department of Justice to open up investigations relating to Jeffrey Epstein, but particularly with Democrats, with his association with Democrats. He has expressly said that. So if there are investigations that are opened up, then that would be a sort of legal and legitimate reason not to release these files, because some might be wrapped up in the investigation. We've obviously seen that before. So that is the sort of conundrum and the situation that we're looking at now, which is why, as we continue to look forward here, it's not exactly certain, even as this law has passed, that this is going to be an easy process between whenever President Trump signs and the next 30 days.
Chris Cuomo here. Welcome to NewsNation. This is where right and left can come to be reasonable. And wow, did we have big buy-in today in our Congress. Unprecedented participation and cooperation as the House said almost with a unanimous voice, release the Epstein files. Unprecedented buy-in from both sides. Remember, It was a quick procedure, and to do it this way, it required a supermajority, not just 50+1, but 2/3 of the House saying yes. Ordinarily, they couldn't get that for what the name of this country is in terms of their level of disagreement. But today, there was only one no vote. They were one vote from being unanimous. Who was it and why? It was a Republican member of Congress, Clay Higgins of Louisiana. And look, while I've said all along, I believe the files have to be released, I'll tell you, Higgins' objection is not wrong. He argued that this type of broad reveal of criminal investigative files, much of which was never acted upon, when released to a rabid media, will absolutely result in innocent people being hurt, not by my vote. I agree. He is not wrong. So why do I want it released anyway? Because the need for it outweighs the likelihood of prejudice. Why? Well, that's the problem. His party, specifically his fringe faction, MAGA, created the need for this release by selling conspiracies about Epstein for years. He was murdered. There are all these big lefties involved. Maybe there's a little tinge of Pizzagate. All this BS. And now the left has decided to fight fire with fire. And the lack of release after all of that rambunctious rhetoric is suspicious. So they're advancing the idea that the reason the files haven't been released and must is because they must be protecting Trump or some of his friends. Trump must be implicated bigly. Remember, it's not like we haven't seen anything in the files, okay? In February, MAGA podcasters, remember their little binders? Over 100 pages of Epstein files from Bondi, flight logs, contact books, a masseuse list, but nothing came from it. And now they kind of look like fools, and that's why they're pushing for the release. In July, the DOJ and the FBI released the infamous memo saying there was no client list. And Kash Patel and Bongino had come out shortly before saying, yeah, there's no proof that it was anything but suicide, which they had been selling the exact opposite of for years at great profit. They then said no one else would be charged and there'd be no more files released, and that sent MAGA crazy and created an opportunity for the left. But then they did release something else, and this is an important check on mythology. The, quote, raw jail footage of the night Epstein died, showing no one went in or out of his cell that night. Cameras didn't work. It was edited. No, that is hype for hysteria, not fact. Forensic analysts quickly picked up that there was a missing minute of footage, right? That was the conspiracy. It's proof they edited it. So in August, Congress subpoenaed the DOJ to release more, and they did. The DOJ turned over 33,000 pages of the files. And again, not a lot new in there except the missing minute of footage. And guess what it showed? Nothing. Why? Because this is often hype, not the demands of the survivors and their families for transparency, and not one other thing that I'm going to mention in a moment. The only thing that really matters here. And then remember, what led us to this moment was last week, the Oversight Committee released over 20,000 pages of documents they received after subpoenaing Epstein's estate. Again, there was no evidence of what's being sold on both sides. You see a pattern? So the question is it hidden? We'll see based on what's released. Will it be satisfying? I doubt it. Why? 3 reasons. Because what you want was never true. And there'll be conspiracies based off that, too, that these were sanitized. Like Epstein's brother told us here, Trump's team is sanitizing them. That will not be easy to pull off. It's also not going to be easy to disprove, hence great for conspiracies. And then the third reason is there may be legitimate legal reasons for privacy or things being kept. So what is the ultimate prize? That's what matters most, and it comes from the survivors. Congressman Massey, Republican, says the FBI has witnessed interviews where survivors named at least 20 powerful men who may have been Epstein's clients that he trafficked girls to. Billionaires, Hollywood producer, royal prince, it's probably that guy Andrew that got defrocked or whatever you call it, a rock star, a magician. But I'll tell you this, couple things. If the DOJ didn't act on any of those things, that's one thing. Now, if they hid those people, that's another. I find that highly unlikely. Why? Because if the names come out at all, they would obviously CYA, right? So if those names come out, they better include information that led not just to the implication within those interviews, what they call the federal 302s, which, remember, lying to a Fed is a crime. Lying to a cop necessarily is not, okay? So a 302 is a heavier statement than just an interview with a cop. But if they include what implicated these men, what was said about them that could be damning, they better include why they decided not to act. And there are a couple other questions. If this list exists, why didn't Massey release who the 20 are? Why didn't the victims' lawyers release who they are? Why didn't they tell us at least whether or not they sued any and all of the 20? So those are questions. I don't know if they'll be satisfied by this release. We'll see. So how do we see it going, and what is hoped for? Senator Rand Paul, Republican Kentucky, not afraid to stand out on principle. He pulls the curtain back on what's happening in our government on a couple of major issues in the interview you're about to see. This is from my podcast, The Chris Cuomo Project. You can subscribe on YouTube right now. The Epstein files are an obsession now in politics. Why do you believe that is, and what do you think happens with the Senate vote?
You know, I think the Epstein files represent something more than the particulars. They represent this idea that people are distrustful of government and justice. They think that perhaps justice might be different if you're rich versus if you're poor. If you know somebody, you might get treated differently. And that's something that's really bad for government, to have people lose trust in the idea that justice is impartial or that justice is blind. And so I hadn't been too involved in this issue. I haven't really thought that there was some momentous thing that was to be gotten. But it represents the idea of impartial justice. And so I voted for the transparency. I voted a couple times for that. And now it looks like it goes to the president's desk, and I hope he will reveal as much as humanly possible to kind of get this behind us.
What's your sense of why more hasn't come out?
You know, I don't really know. I think it also could be that nothing comes out. That, you know, we know most of the people that have been on the planes. We know most of the people have had an association, you know, with Epstein. I don't know that there is going to be any earth-shattering or groundbreaking revelation. I really just don't know. I mean, I'm open to hearing it, and I support the transparency. That's as much as I know.
Are you worried that the transparency won't land that way, that people are so convinced there's smoking guns in there on either side that they'll never be satisfied, and this makes it worse?
Yeah, I think that that's true of a lot of things in government. I think people have become more distrustful of government on many fronts. I would say, you know, I would put the hesitancy on vaccines on the same par, that people are more and more disbelieving what their government tells them because the government hasn't been honest on a few simple things.
Do you believe that you can still do what you wanted to do in government, or has the game changed?
I think the arguments are just as important or more important. So, for example, if you ask me what one of the most important things that I debate, it would be whether or not to send your kids or my kids or somebody's kids to war. There is probably no more important debate. If I'm not here, there aren't many people that will argue that most wars of aggression or most wars, offensive wars, shouldn't be fought, that we should fight when we're attacked, that Congress should vote. People like, oh, Congress is so feckless. And I always remind them that when we've been attacked, we've been fairly unified. One of the lines that I've added to virtually every foreign relations bill that comes through is, nothing in this bill is to be construed as an authorization of use of force. I've tried very hard to be a voice on foreign policy to say, let's re-examine this in a thoughtful way. The idea of blowing up 83 people on boats coming off of Venezuela, we don't know their names. We've been presented with no evidence of their crime. We don't know if they're armed. And when we do capture them, we just send them home. There's got to be drugs floating in the water, I would think, when you blow up the boat. Do we scoop up the drugs, test the drugs? We know that the Coast Guard, when they examine boats off of Miami, 1 in 4 boats that they board does not have any drugs on board. Are we really willing to accept the odds of 25% of the boats we're blowing up might not be drug boats? And even if they do have drugs, when did the death penalty, summary execution without a trial, be the punishment for drugs? That's never been our policy.
Venezuela not being a topic of discussion when it is being surrounded by a military blockade of all these types of assets, Republicans were against the level of support in Ukraine because it was too much. It didn't serve our interests. And they are silent on what's happening around Venezuela, except for you. Explain that to me.
There is no resistance on the Republican side. They are afraid. They are frightened to cross him, and he's become more involved in primaries than any president ever has. And they're just afraid. Even the ones who have a correct instinct are afraid to say anything.
I'm watching the shutdown negotiation as it winds down. Senator Rand Paul says, hold on a second. We have to be aware of what's happening with hemp. It is immediately dismissed. Rand Paul is making a stunt. Rand Paul this. What? Hemp? This is silly. What did you make of that moment and why you chose it?
Well, it's funny because a lot of people think I chose the moment. I didn't choose the moment. I didn't put the provision banning hemp products. So Mitch McConnell stuck this provision in after I had it removed in the summer. I objected. They needed my consent to move forward quickly, so they left it out of the bill. They airdropped it back in. But what they put in there on language on hemp completely overturns about 25 states that already have their own rules. I'm disappointed in it, but it's a big industry. It's a $25 billion industry. It's going to be wiped out. And there's a lot of the people who use these products that are mad now. And I tell them, call Mitch McConnell. I'm not done fighting on it, and we're going to see if we can get it reversed.
Senator Paul is right about that. And the reason you're not hearing about it is because one side doesn't perceive advantage against the other, because that's the way the game is played. You want to check out my podcast? You can watch the full interview. He has a lot of insights in it. He's standing alone right now. The Chris Cuomo Project, wherever you get your podcast.
So setting expectations is very important in cases like this, and Democrats are now moving the goalposts. They know, because they have members on the House Oversight Committee, that the Epstein files will not implicate Trump in wrongdoing. So now it's about not trusting the documents themselves. Therefore, they can keep the narrative going. And we have to be fair about this. There is no end game here. Roughly half of America is convinced that Trump was part of a sex trafficking and pedophilia ring. This now has become their forever story. We also have to be accurate. All available evidence says anything or any insinuation that Trump did something wrong, that he broke the law, that he molested a young woman, all of the evidence tells us that that is objectively untrue. Objectively did not happen by all evidence we've seen so far. But that doesn't mean Democrats will give up the intrigue, the disgust, and the conspiracy of who knew what when and guilt by association. The American people have been sold on the idea that there is a list. There is some cabal of sexual predators out there. But the more we learn, it seems like that may actually not be true after all. And now Republicans have an idea for how to deliver on their promise to expose the evildoers.
Are we going to see the client list?
I don't think there's an actual Epstein list, but if we're able to follow the money, maybe we can construct a list.
So now Republicans are going to construct a list of all the people who have done things wrong. Reasonable people can agree that a new list crafted by House Republicans won't satisfy the American people. It probably won't even satisfy MAGA, but I digress. New Reuters polling shows Americans aren't happy with how this is playing out. 59% of Americans disapprove of Trump's handling of the Epstein files. Just 20% approve, 21% aren't sure. So we hate to spoil the fun because there's going to be a whole nother month of insinuation and intrigue and accusations before we even get the files themselves. There is very little the president can do to fix the perceptions of the American people. And the file release certainly will not do that.
Jeffrey Epstein may not be around anymore to answer questions about his sordid sexual scandal and who knew what when. But there is one person who seemingly has all the answers, and that would be Jeffrey Epstein's longtime associate, Ghislaine Maxwell. She is currently serving 20 years for trafficking underage girls to the late sex offender. Maxwell's doing this at a cushy minimum security prison in Texas known as Club Fed. She was previously at a prison in Florida where she was reportedly miserable, eating moldy food. But now she's reportedly a lot happier, playing with puppies and getting special meals delivered to her, even getting as much toilet paper as she wants. Prison rules limit inmates to 2 rolls a week. We know all this because the prison staff is apparently now dishing the dirt to the media and leaking her emails to Congress. Joining me now is Ghislaine Maxwell's attorney, Arthur Adalia. Thank you so much, Arthur, for joining us. So, have you spoken to Ghislaine about what's happening in Congress? I mean, it would be only a call late today because it all happened today, but as you watch this bill come close to being passed, and then today, of course, being passed, and now on its way to the president's desk.
How are you? And it's great to be back on with you. No, I haven't spoken to Ghislaine. Number 2, I'm one of several lawyers who are representing her. My law firm represented her in that appeal of which you were just speaking of in the Second Circuit here in New York in the federal court. I don't believe Ghislaine is receiving any more special treatment than anyone else is in there. We
That's
do
not
live
what
in
the
a
prison
country
staff
where,
is saying.
yeah, I know, but yeah, I've been doing this a long time, and the prison staff says a lot of things to a lot of people that are not accurate. Prison staff, and I'm going to speak in sweeping generalities, are also the people who sneak the cell phones into the prisons that shouldn't be there, sneak the drugs into the prisons that shouldn't be there. That may be a fraction of the prison staffers, but, you know, don't believe everything you hear. Ghislaine was in a facility in Florida where I visited her, and I got in trouble for, I don't know, I forget if I had a paper clip or something that I wasn't supposed to have, and I was reprimanded. She's in a federal prison camp. Just so you know, there are camps, and that's what they are. There's just less restrictions, but you can't leave. There are all kinds of rules. They tell you when you wake up, they tell you when you go to sleep, they tell you what you're eating. So there's what the congressman just said about the politicization of this case could not be any more accurate. I know that we're going to talk about the victims. I believe 150 people have gotten $121 million from the Epstein Victims Fund. It's not like they have gone unnoticed. It's not like they have gone unaccounted for. You have to understand, I have a very bad taste in my mouth because I represented Alan Dershowitz, where Virginia Giuffre accused him of horrible, horrible, horrible things to one of the greatest lawyers this world has ever known, a 50-year professor at Harvard University, and she destroyed him and his reputation only to then say, I may have made a mistake. The 6 different times I said he raped me in 6 different locations, it wasn't him. Sorry
right,
about
but
that.
That's just, Arthur, that's one victim. I mean,
but she's been the face. Virginia Giuffre has been the face.
We are now seeing the faces of dozens and dozens, perhaps hundreds of other victims. Don't they deserve justice?
But they've got millions of dollars.
But
they've got millions of dollars.
So the people who abuse them get to go free and live their lives, and I mean, that's not the way it works. We don't pay people off.
The person who abused them allegedly is dead, right? They had to say that Jeffrey Epstein
No, they say they were
them.
trafficked by Epstein to other people. Don't those men deserve to be held accountable?
Well, yes, they do. But the congressman is correct. There's crimes like this going on all over the world, especially all over the country. Right here in New York State, the only reason why this is such a hot button issue, why this particular guy is such a hot button guy, number 1 is because of Trump. Number 2 is because then you want to talk about Bill Clinton and Al Gore and all these other names that get bandied about. Here's what President Trump is correct in being cautious about. Anyone whose name gets associated with Jeffrey Epstein gets this black mark on them, gets this like, oh, he's a bad person because he knew Epstein. Epstein knew a lot of people. He was very rich. He had planes, he had islands, and there were a lot of people who spent time with Jeffrey Epstein who did absolutely nothing wrong. But once their name is now associated with him, now they're a bad person.
That shouldn't mean that the people who might have done something criminal should not still be held criminally responsible. I do want to ask you about these emails between Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell that were released by Democrats last week. The two are discussing President Trump being at Epstein's house. Epstein writes to Maxwell, quote, "That dog hasn't barked." Giuffre spent hours at my house with him, meaning Trump. Maxwell responds, I've been thinking about that. But she's on tape telling Trump's deputy attorney general that Trump was never at Epstein's house. Did she lie to the attorney general?
I don't know. I wasn't there. I've never spoken to Ghislaine about this. I do know that we do know that the deceased Virginia Giuffre has been caught in several lies. We do know Giuffre was interviewed by the Southern District of New York to testify in Ghislaine's trial against Ghislaine, and they found her so uncredible,
right? But this
so
isn't
unbelievable that they never called her as a witness.
We're not talking about Virginia Giuffre's credibility. She's
but
dead
we are,
now
to some degree.
No, we're talking about Ghislaine Maxwell's credibility, because she's in an email saying, I've been thinking about the fact that Trump was at your house. And then she's on tape saying, nope, Trump was never at Epstein's house. Which one is true?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know the answer to that question.
And because obviously the concern is she might be saying whatever Todd Blanche, there is the deputy AG, wants to hear in order to help President Trump and in order to get a pardon or a commutation. Is she applying for a commutation or a pardon?
If not through my office, if Ghislaine Maxwell had the keys to the prison, where she was, where I visited her in Tallahassee, and you know what I mean when I say the keys to the prison, any human being in her condition, under her conditions, would use those keys. She was abused during her trial period, abused. She didn't sleep for days. That's on the record. She wasn't fed for days in the United States of America, in New York City.
So you're
in the
saying
middle
she
of
would
her
say
trial, she
anything
was
to get out of
falling
there?
asleep at the table. She was abused. If Sammy the Bull Gravano decided to testify against John Gotti to get himself out of prison, I would think that someone like Ghislaine Maxwell, if she had the goods on all these people that everyone thinks, she would, her self-preservation instincts would kick in, and she would do what needs to be done. But maybe, as she has said, these are all fairy tales. Jeffrey Epstein is dead, and he can't defend himself. And if I defend myself, I get thrown into solitary confinement. So maybe this has become some political hot potato that's been going on for years, and basically has taken on a whole life of its own.
Arthur Idella, thank you. So you didn't answer. Is she applying for a commutation? Is she preparing?
I said not through my office.
Not through your office. Okay. All right, Arthur, thank you. I appreciate you coming on and answering all the questions.
It was a pleasure.
All right, take care.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.